After BBC World News Today.
This is BBC World News Today. I'm Kasia Madeira. Our top stories. A fragile ceasefire in Libya holds as rival militias terrorise the country. We have a special report from the country where civilians are desperate for change. Brazil's election contest is hit by an attempted murder. The front-runner for president will spend at least a week in hospital after being stabbed while campaigning. As the UN meets to discuss the fate of Syria's last rebel stronghold inside Idlib itself, thousands protest, calling on neighbouring countries to intervene. And we speak to Queen Elizabeth's granddaughter, Sara Tyndall, about the highs and lows of living her life in the glare of the public. Hello and a very warm welcome to World News Today. After more than a week of fierce fighting between rival factions in Libya, which forced thousands to leave their homes, a fragile ceasefire brokered by the UN appears to be holding. Well, 7 years ago, rebel groups backed by a military coalition, which included Britain, toppled the dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Since then, there has been political and military chaos. One result has seen a huge surge in African migrants using the country as a route to Europe. The latest violence between rival militias erupted around the capital, Tripoli. Well, the BBC has the only international news team there. Clive Myrie has sent this report.
We're entering a nervous city. Only now, after a week of fighting and 3 ceasefires, do we think it's safe to enter Tripoli. Along this same road 7 days ago, fighters from armed groups based outside the capital breached the city walls. But rival factions inside Tripoli were ready for the fight. The battles left scores dead, including civilians, and forced thousands to flee their homes. Darkness provided no respite. The battles are over for now, but the scars linger. At his family compound, Ali El Lamari doted on 2 grandchildren, who are now dead.
The rocket or missile landed right where the children were playing. There was blood everywhere, on the ground, all over the trees. When you see the body of your grandchild in pieces, my daughter had to see it too.
I'm very, very, very sad. I'm very sad. 10 years, 10 سنوات احنا نبين نقتل. علاش؟
Why are we still all fighting? Why?
Muaid was 14 and Abdi Karim 15. They were buried 1 week ago today.
Libya's problems, the deaths, the destruction are the result of the messy end of Colonel Gaddafi's rule. The armed groups that helped topple him carved up the country, leaving no one in overall control. And the militias and groups that stayed within the capital are being accused of being greedy, of siphoning off funds, of ruining the economy. Those groups outside the capital now say they had to intervene.
There is a UN-backed government in Tripoli, but it's accused of allowing the armed factions in the capital to act with impunity. With so many militias and fighting groups seemingly running the country, Libya is a failed state. And seizing on that failure have been the people smugglers. The fighting of recent days has ensnared many of the thousands of migrants who are trying to use Libya as a gateway to Europe across the Mediterranean. These people had to break out of a detention center when the fighting got too close. This man says there was gunfire at night and 5 people were hit. That's why we escaped. But even as we tried to run, another man was shot. Libyans are tired of the men with guns having all the influence, and hopes for nationwide elections by the end of the year and now in ruins. Once again, an attempt to stitch together this fractured nation has come to nothing. Clive Myrie, BBC News in Tripoli.
Well, Clive brought us this update from Tripoli just a short time ago.
2 previous ceasefires have failed, but this third one is now entering almost 3 days, which is a marked achievement here in Libya. That's meant that we've been able to travel the road here, the main road into the capital, Tripoli, and we found a city that is on edge. There's no question about that, because, as I say, previous ceasefires have come to nothing, but everything is relatively quiet now, and as you indicated at the beginning of the sequence, the main airport here is now open to international planes once again. It's been shut for several days now, and that does suggest that things may be getting back onto an even footing. But with so many men with guns, with militias outside and armed groups outside the capital and inside the capital, then it's a combustible mix that could mean that the ceasefire that's holding so far could fail any minute.
Clive Myrie there reporting from Tripoli. Now, in Brazil, the man widely tipped to be the country's next president is recovering in hospital after being stabbed at a campaign rally. Jair Bolsonaro was attacked while he was moving among a crowd in the southeastern state of Minas Gerais. He is a controversial candidate, even by Brazilian standards, as Katie Watson reports.
Out on the campaign trail and working the crowds. With just a few weeks to go before the elections, far-right presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro was in his element. But the celebrations came to an abrupt end. Mr. Bolsonaro suddenly gripped his chest in pain after being stabbed. Chaos ensued, and the politician was rushed through the crowd to hospital. Initially, his son Flavio reported on Twitter that the wound was only superficial, but that soon changed. Unfortunately, he said later, it was more serious than we'd expected. He lost a lot of blood and arrived at the hospital almost dead. But his condition is now stable. Please pray for him. Mr. Bolsonaro is a politician whose polarised opinion in Brazil. He's become known for his racist, sexist and homophobic comments, but his tough talk of tackling violent crime and of beating corruption has helped propel him to the top of the race. The latest polls show that if, as expected, former President Lula da Silva is banned from running because of his corruption conviction, Mr. Bolsonaro would win the most votes in the first round. Politicians of all stripes, even his biggest critics, were united in condemning the attack.
Whoever did this has to pay. Whoever did this cannot stay unpunished. This cannot happen. A democratic country, which respects itself, that wants to be democratic, cannot allow the stabbing of any presidential candidate.
Police have since released a photo of the suspect who was arrested. He's been named as Adelio Bispo de Oliveira. Next month's elections are the most uncertain this country has seen in decades. With this stabbing, tensions are now running even higher. Katie Watson, BBC News in Sao Paulo.
Shares in Tesla have plummeted more than 9% after images emerged of its co-founder Elon Musk, which show him appearing to smoke cannabis while he was on the Joe Rogan live podcast. Well, since the show was posted online, Tesla's chief accounting officer resigned after just 1 month in the job. And there are also reports that the head of Tesla's human resources department has also called it quits. Well, let's cross over to New York. Our business correspondent Kim Gitelson joins us live. Kim, it's not a question about whether Elon Musk did anything illegal, because of course smoking marijuana is legal in California, but we're looking at the bigger picture here.
Of course. I mean, the question for Elon Musk is when his idea of being an unconventional chief executive tips into irresponsibility. You know, he's had quite a wild summer. He's accused a British cave diver of pedophilia. Those claims seem to be unfounded. He also tweeted that he wanted to take Tesla private at a valuation of $420 per share. Many people thought that was maybe a coded reference to cannabis. He later walked back those plans just 16 days later, and now he's seen on video smoking marijuana. I mean, I think all of these factors together have combined to give investors and some of his close friends quite a bit of worry about how he's coping with the increasing pressure that Tesla's facing to hit its production targets.
Yes, and we're seeing that in terms of the figures because, of course, the shares are plummeting. Some Wall Street analysts are calling for a very strong deputy. Is that something that can happen with someone who is like Elon Musk?
You know, so far we haven't seen the board of the company necessarily push for that. But as you mentioned, shares in the company have plummeted today. They're down nearly a third since the beginning of the year. They hit a year low, which suggests that there are a lot of investors in the company who are worried about its future. And as a result, if this continued pressure on Tesla shares holds, it could force the board to make some changes. What those will be, obviously, are still to be determined.
OK, Kim, well, as always, thank you very much for bringing us up to date. Kim Gitelson there, our business correspondent in New York. It's the military action that the world has expected and feared for some time. President Assad is preparing for what could be the end game in Syria's brutal civil war, a government military assault on the country's last rebel stronghold of Idlib. Now, these exclusive pictures are from protests held today in Idlib city. There are jihadist fighters there, but of the nearly 3 million people now crammed into the province, many are refugees and many are children. The UN is meeting now to discuss the situation in Idlib. Neda Tawfik has been watching events at the UN in New York.
What we've seen so far is really every member of the council really sounding the alarm and really stressing that these are civilians who are at risk. So the UK ambassador to the UN, Karen Pierce, for example, said there are more babies than terrorists in Idlib. And she said that the international community would hold those to account who commit war crimes. And she laid out a number of names of military commanders that she said the UK knows is in the area, basically saying we know who you are and you will be punished if you carry out any war crimes in Idlib. But certainly the UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura had a very clear message. He says that the UN is ready to help with evacuations to create a safe humanitarian corridor, and he really placed the responsibility on the guarantors of the Astana process, so Russia, Turkey, and Iran, who are safeguarding Idlib as a de-escalation zone, because of course half of the people there have come from places like eastern Ghouta and Aleppo to seek safety there, and he said simply there is no Idlib after Idlib.
Neda Tawfik reporting. Now, British Airways could be fined as much as $650 million for a huge data breach which has affected tens of thousands of people. Hackers managed to access details of 380,000 bookings made with the airline over a 2-week period. BA said that personal and financial details had been compromised, although passport information had not. It says that any customer who has been affected financially will be compensated. Many have been forced to cancel their credit and debit cards. Here's our business correspondent, Emma Simpson.
In the BA website, I've got 6 cards lodged, so it was really annoying trying to find a way of contacting British Airways to see if all my cards had been compromised.
Like many thousands of other BA customers, George Herrera's bank details have been hacked, and he's had a confusing day working out what he should do.
I don't think I have to cancel all my credit cards, but I don't know. And so I'm in the process of doing that. And it's going to take a long time because each card takes at least 25 minutes to get through the system.
So what do we know about this data breach? Well, it affected customers who made a booking or changed one through the British Airways website or BA app from 11 p.m. on August 21st up until 9:45 on Wednesday evening. 380,000 cards were affected. BA says hackers stole names, addresses, email addresses and payment information. That included the card number, expiry date and, critically, the 3-digit security code on the back. I'm not letting you see my 3-digit number because it's a bit like giving you the keys to my safe. Now, with an online transaction, this number shouldn't be stored. BA says they weren't. So how did hackers get hold of them? Emily here is a cybersecurity expert. What could have happened?
Well, one theory is that a supplier to BA actually got compromised in the first place. So when you're booking a flight on the website, you may not realise, but there's lots of third-party software that's used within those web pages to do things like process card information. So it could be that they were targeted because they were a little weaker on security and then used to extract the data.
BA says it's sorry, promising compensation for any customers who may end up out of pocket.
This was a very sophisticated criminal attack on BA.com. And over more than 20 years that BA.com has been operating, we've never had a breach of this type.
BA could face a fine of around £500 million. But given the speed of BA's response, regulators may not impose such a sky-high penalty. Emma Simpson, BBC News.
In the United States, politicians are gearing up for election season ahead of the midterms in November. President Trump is due to speak shortly. These are live images at a fundraising event in Fargo, North Dakota, and he's there to campaign for a Republican candidate standing for the Senate. Later, he's going on to South Dakota for a fundraiser for a candidate who's standing for governor there. And he's had a bit of a week, hasn't he, with that anonymous article in the New York Times. Still a lot of speculation over who wrote that. Now, voters in both states backed President Trump in the presidential election in 2016. Now, meanwhile, the former President Barack Obama has been on the stump today too. In a speech to students in Illinois, he accused Donald Trump of capitalizing on fear and anger. Well, let's cross over to Gary O'Donoghue, who is in Washington for us. And we haven't heard much from the former president, from Barack Obama, for a while now, but he's certainly made up for it in a scathing attack on his successor.
That's right. He's been pretty quiet for a number of months now. He was, of course, speaking at John McCain's funeral last week and made some comments there that were interpreted as criticisms of President Trump, but he hasn't come out in this sort of full-throated way so far. But this is a change to all that. This is the beginning of the run-up to the midterm elections in November. He's got a whole series of campaign stops planned, and I think the Democrats will be very, very pleased about that, because he is in many ways their best asset still, even though he's a former president, etc. He's not really in the game anymore in that sense. But he is a talisman for them. And he did lay into the White House. He said that everyone had to go and vote because democracy mattered and democracy counted on them voting this time around, and criticised various parts of Donald Trump's policy agenda, but also was scathing about the kind of dialogue, the kind of political dialogue that was going on at the moment, particularly around issues of race.
It shouldn't be Democratic or Republican to say we don't target certain groups of people based on what they look like or how they pray. We are Americans. We're supposed to stand up to bullies, not follow them. We're supposed to stand up to discrimination. And we're sure as heck supposed to stand up clearly and unequivocally to Nazi sympathizers. How hard can that be, saying that Nazis are bad?
So, Gary, after having kept that low profile since leaving office, are we going to see a lot more of Barack Obama on the campaign trail?
I think you are, and just to pick up on the end of that, he's of course referring to the whole Charlottesville situation last year, where the president said there was good people on both sides in that, where the white supremacists were marching. But yeah, I think you're going to see there's certainly more stops planned. He's going to California at the weekend to support some congressional candidates there. We're going to Ohio as well, Illinois again, I think, Pennsylvania possibly. So yeah, he's going to hit some of those key states to try and energize the base, get them out to vote. He was angry, of course, with the current administration, but he was also angry with the young voters he was talking to today, those young university students, saying that only 1 in 5 of them had voted at the last midterm elections. Again, sort of telling them if you don't do anything, then things won't change. And that's really his key message, I think, this time around.
Indeed. Gary, as always, thank you very much. Gary O'Donoghue in Washington. She's an Olympic silver medalist and an accomplished equestrian, and also the granddaughter of the Queen. Sara Tyndall is now back in the saddle 4 months after the birth of her second child. She has been speaking exclusively to our correspondent Sally Nugent about her very public highs and lows, and about how 2 miscarriages have helped make her family stronger.
So we're back to the serious business of the day job now.
Yeah, both. I've got 2 jobs.
Please step up the daddy daycare routine. I'll leave you to it. Have fun.
You. Take care. This is class affairs. This is my nice 9-year-old that hopefully will be my next good one, or that's the plan anyway. Horses are very much in my life, in my family.
Position buzz.
Being able to kind of have them still in my life and part of my career is great.
It really hasn't been an easy couple of years for you privately, has it? You announced your pregnancy in 2016 and then very sadly went on to lose the baby. And we also heard later on that you'd lost another child as well in between your 2 girls.
I think that's the hardest thing in our situation, is that everyone knew. I have a very supportive family. You know, Mike's incredible, and it's hard for the guys too. It's very different for us because we're carrying the child, but for guys, I guess it's kind of that helpless feeling, which, you know, and horrible for them. You know, hopefully it makes you a stronger family.
You are the daughter and granddaughter of 2 of possibly the most hard-working women in the public eye. Do you think that work ethic is something you've inherited?
Probably. I mean, I think it's something that I've been around all my life, so you would hope that some of it would rub off in a good way.
Sara Tyndall there speaking to Sally Nugent. Now, every year, millions of tons of plastic waste flow into the sea around the world. Now, for the first time, there's going to be an attempt to get into the middle of the Pacific Ocean to try to clean it. In the biggest operation of its kind, a huge plastic collection system will be towed out from California tomorrow. Our science editor, David Shookman, explains.
In San Francisco, final construction of a massive project with an incredibly bold ambition: to try to clear the oceans of plastic waste. This animation shows how the huge structure is meant to collect millions of pieces of plastic, to make them easier to get rid of. Sights like this have shocked people around the world, and images of the damage to wildlife have inspired this effort to clean up.
If we don't do it now, all this plastic will start breaking down into smaller and smaller pieces. And the smaller the pieces are, the more harmful and the harder to extract from the marine environment. So we feel there is a sense of urgency.
There's plastic waste in every ocean around the world, and this is the first attempt to clean it up. It'll take place in the eastern Pacific in a rotating current that traps plastic, what's called the Great Garbage Patch. It's bigger than Britain and France combined. So how is the project meant to work? Well, a giant tube 600 meters long will float on the surface and bend into a shape like a horseshoe, drifting naturally with the currents and the winds. Now, because it'll move faster than all the bits of plastic in the water, it should slowly gather them together into a small area. Underwater, a kind of barrier will hang 3 meters down and trap plastic below the surface. And the design should mean that any fish will pass under it. And once the plastic has been drawn into a dense mass, it'll then be collected by ship and taken away to be recycled. No one can be sure if the huge system will work, and some experts worry it could harm marine life.
The major problem is those creatures that passively float in the ocean and can't actually move out of the way. They're going to be, once they're in this array, they're going to be trapped there, unable to move. And for example, plankton is it's the bottom of the food chain, so we really don't want to be taking that out of our oceans.
That's clearly from the teeth of a fish, is it? I mean, there's no other...
No, there's no other explanation.
One of the scientists on the clean-up project says because the plastic is being eaten by fish, it's entering the food chain. so should be removed. It's been there for years.
We find plastic from the 70s, from the 80s, from the 90s in the middle of the ocean, and then we also find, languages on those bits of plastic. So we'll find in the North Pacific a lot of Chinese, Japanese, English, and we try to define where those things may have come from.
The plan is to start with one collection device and eventually deploy 60 of them. But all the time, more plastic is pouring down rivers into the oceans. So on its own, the clean-up operation will never be enough. David Shrookman, BBC News.
Now, just time to tell you that the American coffee company Starbucks has opened its first store in Italy, in a city considered the birthplace of the country's renowned espresso culture, Milan. The company hopes to target curious coffee lovers with a lavish roastery offering freshly ground beans and a premium brew. But some Milanese are sceptical, declaring Starbucks coffee to be not coffee at all, and there have been complaints over Starbucks prices, in some cases treble that of a traditional Milanese cafe. I would love to hear from you if you are in Milan. What do you think? Bye-bye.